Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent and currently reading video. So I'm reading lots of things, but I did finish a couple of books. You will have seen that I finished Dirt Music by Tim Winton last weekend. I have a whole vlog about this from last weekend. So if you want to hear more about my thoughts on this book, please check that out. Short summary, I liked it pretty well. It takes place in Australia. I had some problems with the ending, but the book kept me very interested and I read it in about 24 hours. I then finished my buddy read with Britta. This is The Invention of Nature, Alexander von Humboldt's New World by Andrea Wulf. This is a nonfiction all about Alexander von Humboldt, who was a German naturalist and explorer in the 1800s. He is basically the grandfather of our current environmental sort of movement. He was one of the first people to talk about how interconnected all living creatures and nature is. He was one of the first people, he was the first person to describe climate zones and vegetation zones that we still use today. He was one of the first people to talk about isoclines. He was one of the first people to talk about plate tectonics. He just was this extremely intelligent person who was able to take information from lots of fields of study and put them together in a very interesting and compelling way. And he was also one of the first people to really bring together nature and talking about nature in a beautiful, poetical way. So he influenced people like Henry David Thoreau and other sort of poets and literary writers of the time. And he influenced Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution and other environmental thinkers like John Muir later on in life. So this was an excellent read for me. This was a book that I would highly recommend. There are sections or chapters which I found less interesting simply because they weren't talking about Humboldt. They were talking about some of these other people that came after Humboldt that were influenced by him. Like Muir and some others that I didn't find their stories particularly that interesting, but all of the stuff about Humboldt and his explorations in South America and across Russia I thought were amazing. So highly recommend. And if you're doing Read German books this year, this book wasn't written in German, but it's all about a very important German figure. So I think it's sort of runs parallel to that themed reading and would make an excellent addition to your German reading for the year. I then finished an audiobook, a romance, Chasing Cassandra by Lisa Kleypas. That was my romance buddy read this month with Doris and Katie. Excuse me, a little bit of a tickle in my throat. So this was the last book in the Ravenel series, and it was the story of Cassandra, the youngest daughter of the family, and her romance with Tom Severin, a wealthy industrialist. And it was delightful. It was really excellent. Again, another one in the series where it wasn't a patronizing relationship. Tom Severin, although he's very wealthy and very experienced, and Cassandra was very sheltered and much younger. Their relationship was not unequal. They dealt with each other on equal footing, and it really was about, you know, two people who have very different ideas about how their lives are going to play out, but yet fall in love with each other and then have to negotiate how they're going to live together when they both have very different ideals and wishes and dreams for themselves. I thought it was brilliant. I really loved it. I love the whole series as taken in its entirety. I would highly recommend. The first two books are the weakest, I think, and then as successively as the series goes on, they're just awesome and great fun and good escape and bring a smile to your face and warm your heart and just what you need for times of stress and strife as we're currently experiencing. So what am I also reading and not finished? I am currently reading 6 other books, and I'll talk about the 2 that I don't have physical copies of first. So on ebook through Scribd, I'm reading Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. This is my second Aussie April read. It's a nonfiction book all about the Aborigines in Australia and how Bruce Pascoe is basically presenting information that demonstrates the Aborigines were not simply a hunter-gatherer, less developed agriculturally society, which the Europeans then came and sort of, were the saviors and brought civilization to, that in fact the Aborigines had their own highly developed societies with lots of agricultural aspects to that culture. It is super interesting, but it's very dry. It's very academic, and so I can't read a lot of it at once. I'm sort of reading it slowly, allowing time for the information to penetrate my brain, but it's not sort of narrative nonfiction that you can breeze through. So liking it, but just a caveat that it is very academic, and so that may not be your jam. I'm also still listening to The Kingdom of Copper, the second book in the Devabad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. That's my buddy read with Lindsay. It's a fantasy novel with Middle Eastern basically setting and flavors, kind of Arabian Nights type of feeling that you get from it. It's the second book in the series, not something I can really talk about very much, but it's delightful and fascinating and very compelling, and we're enjoying it very much. Okay, so physical books that I'm reading. I'm currently reading The Farm in the Green Mountains by Alice Herdan-Zuckmayer, which is originally written in the German and translated from the German by Ida H. Washington and Carol E. Washington. I am buddy reading this with Doris and Will, and this is a collection of basically short essays that were written by Alice Zuckmayer, who was an immigrant from Germany right before World War II. She and her husband were expelled from Germany because her husband was a writer and he had been writing negative things about the Nazis, and so basically they kicked them out, and they came to America with their children, and they end up on a farm in Vermont in the Green Mountains. And this is her writing back to her family during the beginning period of World War II, with what's happening to her and how she's feeling. And those letters were subsequently collected and published in German periodicals a little bit after the war, and now they've been collected into this book by New York Review of Books, and it is awesome. These are so good. They are poignant. There's a lot in here about what it's like to be an immigrant in a new country, especially an immigrant population or a member of a community of immigrants that is looked on with suspicion because of the war. Obviously, Pearl Harbor happens and they're in Vermont, and that, how their neighbors react to them and how the country reacts to Germans in America at that time period is fascinating. It's also fascinating because living in a rural community in Vermont is like super fascinating during the 1940s. Very much resonates with me as a person who lives in rural Maine. There's a lot of very New England characteristics about these stories. Just delightful, loving it. If you're looking for a great book for read German books year, this is highly, highly recommended. I also picked up another book to make me feel good, and this is a middle grade book. This is 365 Days of Wonder, Mr. Brown's Precepts, a quote for every day of the year about courage, friendship, love, and kindness by R.J. Palacio. I read Wonder by R.J. Palacio several years ago, and have since watched the movie. I love Wonder. I think it's an amazing, amazing middle grade book about a boy with a facial deformity and how it just made me cry even talking about it because I love it so much. How he impacts his community and his school. And this is just there's a little short essay from the teacher, Mr. Brown, and then each page is like a quote or a precept, right? Be yourself, everyone else is already taken by Oscar Wilde. Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness by Seneca. Find your greatness, because the the idea behind this is that Mr. Brown has asked his students to collect maxims or precepts that speak to them and mail them to him on a postcard in the summertime. And then he takes these and collects them into this book. And so I've just been slowly working my way through each of them. And I read a few at a time, and it sort of gives me a little pick-me-up. This has been on my shelf for quite a while. And I just felt like I needed something to make me smile and make me feel happy, and this book is definitely fitting the bill. I started yesterday Regeneration by Pat Barker. This is book 1 in her historical fiction trilogy about World War I. I am buddy reading this with Sean the Book Maniac. So I didn't know very much about this other than I had read that book by Pat Barker, Silence of the Girls, last year, and really loved it. So I wanted to read some more Pat Barker. And then Sean and I began talking about this trilogy, and it's so beloved and well reviewed, and we thought that it would be fun to read together. So this is about Siegfried Sassoon. In 1917, he is a British soldier, and he basically says, he writes a letter and says, I'm quitting this war. I think the loss of life and the horrible things that the British and the Germans are doing to each other should not happen. And so I'm a conscientious objector, not because of religion, but because I think this war is just not, there's no end in mind, and there's no plan for how to finish this off that I can buy into and believe in. And so it's what happens to him after he says, I don't want to fight anymore, being already in the military. And so I've only read the first 2 chapters, and so far it's very, very good, the first 2 chapters, but I don't really have anything else to say other than that. And then the last thing that I'm currently reading is the book that I planned to read in March for my March of the Mammoth book and didn't get around to. So this is The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. This is book 3 in the Cromwell trilogy. It's been everywhere, all over BookTube. I am on page 140 at this point. And I will tell you that I am having a hard time with this book right now because it's hard. This is very dense historical fiction, which is, the first 2 books I really enjoyed, but they are not easy books to read. They are difficult, and there's a lot of characters and a lot going on, and the sort of the language style and the writing style is not always the most straightforward. And so my brain is not, as many people's brains right now, is not like firing on all cylinders all of the time. So I am finding this hard to read, but I am determined I don't want to just push through it for the sake of pushing through it. I want to read it because I'm interested to see how it ends, and I really did enjoy the first 2 books in the trilogy. And so I'm like just determined to get my reading chops back. So I sat down with this book yesterday, and I read, I think I read about 80 pages of it yesterday, and I was starting to get back in the swing of it. So I am, going to be continuing on with this, and I don't think it's necessarily the book's fault that I sort of had a hard time getting into this. And I think that now that I'm 140 pages in, I'm sort of back in the swing of things with the narrative flow, and I think it should go better from here on out. So that's where I am with my reading, what I've finished recently, and what I'm currently reading. I did just want to say that I also want to recommend a TV show, which I don't watch very many TV shows. I mostly like to read in my spare time. But this weekend, my husband and my daughter and I have started watching The Morning Show on Apple TV, which is the show which is starred in by Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon about a morning news program on American TV, which it rocked. The whole system is rocked when the male co-host, played by Steve Carell, is accused of sexual misconduct and is fired by the network, the TV network. And so it's all the fallout of the main male host of a major news network program being fired for Me Too reasons, and what happens to basically the women of the show afterwards. It's awesome. If you have access to Apple TV, I got it for free for a year when I bought a new phone. Otherwise, I would not have access to it. But the show is amazing. Jennifer Aniston is amazing. I mean, I loved her in Friends 20 years ago when I was in college, 25 years ago now when I was in college. And I've liked her movies too. But Jennifer Aniston in this show kicks butt. She's awesome. And Reese Witherspoon is very good as well. And there's other characters who I don't know all their names yet, but they're also very good. We're 3 episodes in and very much enjoying that show. So definitely want to shout that out. If that's, something that interests you, I will caveat it by saying, because I know some of you out there don't like bad language. And there's a lot of F-bombs in that show. I mean, the language is terrible, not gonna lie, but I loved it. I mean, I love the show. I don't love the language, but I love the show. So I have to shout it out here today. Okay, that's it for me today. I hope you're all doing well and finding some good books to read. I'll talk to you later.